Amanda Costa, MSW RSW, is a mental health outreach worker with Unison Health and Community Services. Amanda is a passionate social worker with over 8 years of community service experience. Her skills focused on individual counseling, group facilitation, program development, and outreach planning. Amanda has experience working with diverse populations such as youth, seniors, substance users, sex workers, survivors of violence, and those living with mental health challenges. Over the years, she has worked both independently and collaboratively to deliver client-centered services using a strength-based and anti-oppressive framework. As a growing professional, she is committed to community collaboration, low barrier service delivery, and social justice. Adana Phillip, MSW and RSW. I wanna ask when we start, what does MSW and RSW mean for folks on the call and myself as well? Adana is a social supports manager with CEE Center for Toronto for Young Black Professionals. Adana is a registered social worker, MSW, author, and transformation coach. As the social support manager at CEE, she leads in developing a solution-based intervention framework to facilitate the well-being, transformation, crisis management of current and alumni participants. Adana obtained an honors in, in bachelor's in BA in psychology from York University and a master's of social work from U of T, and has been in the sector for over 15 years. Welcome, Adana and Amanda.
Thank you for having us.
No doubt. Can we get your videos on, guys, and just a little bit of volume, a little, volume here, please. Yes, our guests are here. All right. How are you guys doing today on this Tuesday afternoon or evening?
Good. The sun is shining, so.
Yeah, I was gonna say the same thing. The sun is out, you can't complain.
This is it.
Right.
All right. I'm gonna just sorry, I was reading and I was seeing ice cream trucks and like a whole bunch of stuff happening. So it's summertime and I'm working from home, right? So so we're just gonna jump right into it. Tell us a bit about your organizations that you represent, and some of the services offered through your organization, which would be Unison and CEE Toronto.
All right. So I guess I can start.
Yeah.
You mentioned first, though, the MSW and RSW. So the MSW simply means that we both have master's degree in social work. Um, and the RSW simply means that we are registered because officially you cannot call yourself a social worker if you're not registered. So even if you went to school for all these years and paid all this money, if you don't register with the College of Social Workers, then you can't call yourself a social worker.
Yes.
That's what that means. So a little bit about C. So as has been said, I'm from C Center for Young Black Professionals. C is a Toronto-based charity that exists to support Black youth ages 14 to 29 or 14 and over. We are committed to addressing the social and economic barriers facing Black youth in Toronto and beyond. Our mission really is to create a society where Black youth are able to achieve financial freedom and they're able to achieve a high quality of life. Part of the way that we do that is by creating or training young people in 5 major industries. So we run a program in digital technology, in trades, in the social service sector, in film and production, and in hospitality. What is unique about our programs is that we're not just about technical training, but we are intentional. We've been intentional from the beginning about having person-centered supports as a part of all of our programs. So we recognize that it's not just about the technical training, it's not just about the technical skills, but also about the very soft skills that makes an individual successful in any workplace. And it's about helping young people to navigate some of the barriers that they face and some of the barriers that are not accounted for or that are dismissed in certain settings, but are certainly very relevant to the way they experience education or school or training program. So in a nutshell, let's see.
Do you mind just elaborating when you say person-centered programming?
Yeah, so I mentioned the 5 sectors that we train individuals in. For each of our programs, we have a social worker or a social support worker assigned. The role of that individual is to do assessments and to provide whatever services or supports that the young person will need in order to be successful in the program. So every single person gets to meet with the social worker on a regular basis, and then we go through what are some of the challenges that they're facing. So it might be housing for one person, it might be food security for another person, it might be mental health services for another person, it might be family relationship breakdown for another person. And then we create wraparound plans or support plans around the individual's needs. So for example, every at the beginning, everybody creates their goals as to what they want to see accomplished by the end of the program, and then the social worker, along with the program facilitator and everyone else, works with the individual in order to meet those needs, in order to navigate those barriers, whether it's childcare, whatever that looks like. We don't just dismiss the other part of your life. We recognize that people are holistic beings, and even though it's not technical, it really does affect the way an individual can, or if they can at all, go through a program.
Thank you for that. Amanda, tell us a bit about Unison.
So Unison is a community health center. We're located in the West End, northwest end of Toronto. So we provide primary care services. So we have doctors, nurses, dietitians, social workers. We have a lot of community services. So like harm reduction, for example, or we also have a lot of youth programming. We support people with housing. We have a legal aid clinic. We have a lot of health promotion programming as well, so supporting seniors, new parents, providing exercise and wellness groups. So that's Unison in a nutshell. And we also provide services for folks with health cards, folks with refugee status, and we also service folks with no status in the country as well. There is some eligibility criteria, but we really try to service the most vulnerable populations, because we know how challenging it is to get these kind of services, right?
That's really when you talk about undocumented, and this is off script here, when you talk about undocumented workers, are they navigating certain issues due to COVID that other communities are not so much?
I think a lot of folks that are like non-status are kind of the struggles that they're dealing with are very different than the ones folks with who are permanent residents or Canadians are not dealing with. So like immigration right now, things are kind of pending because of COVID, things are delayed. There's a lot of worry, like people, when they're ill, they might be afraid to, like report certain things, or whether it's like violence or they have health concerns, there's always that additional fear. So a lot of folks, not everybody always knows their rights. So a lot of our work here at Unison is being an advocate and kind of helping people know how to navigate these complicated systems, because it isn't easy, right? And it's folks with no status, there's an additional barrier. And a lot of them, language barrier is huge, right? So they're navigating a lot on top of a global pandemic, right? So it's challenging.
It is. I mean, I hadn't really thought about what it would have been like to be worried about getting COVID, and if you have it, not being able to go to the doctor to report it. So that's really, what is your role at your organizations? And you can just talk a little bit about that. Adana, back with you.
So at CEE, I am part of or the manager of the social supports team or the social support department. And what that means is just that I manage the social workers and the other social support workers on staff. It's a new ish department. We generally just had the programs department before, but we recognize the need to be even more intentional than we've always been about social supports and about really ensuring that we're doing everything possible to support our young people.
Mhm.
As your needs for wraparound supports are very different from social support. So it's around creating systems that are efficient and effective. It's around creating partnerships that are going to benefit our young people. It's around developing different strategies that are going to be the most effective in terms of meeting the needs for our young people and ensuring that the frontline staff, are always well supported because, as you can imagine, that's the people who are supporting others also need support, and we want it to be even more intentional about that.
That's a great point. I'm gonna put that's a question I'm gonna be figuring out for later on. I'm just gonna put you guys on warning. Yeah. What are some of the ways? I'm sorry, and Amanda, and yourself.
Yeah, so I work within the mental health and social work program within the agency, and I'm kind of the first person of contact. I do like the central intake. And I support people with kind of system navigation, that kind of thing. And we'll go into more detail after.
Okay. And what are some of the ways that you support your clients? Staying with you, Amanda.
Primarily, so when folks call me, they're often looking for mental health support. So I support community members and community agencies with like system navigation. I provide brief solution focused therapy. So kind of like while folks are waiting to maybe see a long-term social worker for counseling, I provide like 1 to 3 sessions so they can kind of get prepped for that more long-term work. I provide some case management, and I also, when groups are running, I also facilitate a number of the groups that we run here at Unison, the therapeutic groups. So that's kind of my role here.
Okay. And Adana?
Okay, so a lot of what Amanda said is also
Very similar.
yeah, what I do or what the social support team does. So and now I should also say that our client base has definitely expanded since COVID. So prior to COVID, we served members who were going through one of our programs. Since this has happened, we have sort of expanded our scope to just include really members of the Black community. So you don't have to be going through any one of our programs to access the services that we offer now, which includes kind of like what Amanda was saying, system navigation. Everybody's trying to figure out how do you navigate all the things that are going out. Especially at the beginning, there was so much information coming out and things were
Yeah.
changing every other day, and folks were just confused. So being able to sift through that information and give people just the simplest version and even hold people's hands through applying
Yeah.
for things like CERB, a lot of mental health support and counseling for long-term counseling, as well as more brief solution-focused therapy, career navigation, especially for folks who are part of our program, so career navigation, and just helping to build individuals' networks and meet their basic needs. So that looks like food support, that looks like housing security, that looks like a variety of different things, whatever need they come with, really.
It sounds like it has to be holistic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I love that word.
Yeah.
I love that word. It definitely needs to be holistic.
Yeah.
How long have you both been working with your organizations? Amanda?
I have been with Unison for 3 years, and I think Adana, like, it's almost the same, right? We started at the same time almost.
Yeah, it's just over 3 years now. I think I started in April or so. So yeah, it's about 3 years.
Yeah.
What work were you doing before that prepared you for your current position? Adana?
Um, I found that to be a very interesting question because I feel like everything I've done in my life has prepared me for this position. And to be fair, the way I saw myself in the social service field wasn't necessarily what it is now initially, but I've always been passionate about systems that are oppressive or just people who, like myself, are disenfranchised, whether that what I'm talking about the women or what I'm talking about black folks. Like I've always been in that, like that's always been my mindset. I have been a teacher. My first job was as a teacher in the Caribbean. So that really helps with my need to facilitate workshops here. I've done work with York University's Black Students Alliance. I've done work with the University of Toronto supporting Black students who were trying to figure out what their next steps in their careers were. I live in a neighborhood improvement area. I've worked in neighborhood improvement areas, JVS, Jane and Finch. I've worked at a youth shelter. Um, a variety, everything I've done has been preparation for working specifically with Black youth in the Canadian or the Toronto climate, really.
Thank you for that. And Amanda.
Yeah, thanks. And as you're sharing, I'm like, so many social workers' narratives are very similar. And I think, for me, I remember being a little girl, and I, as a woman and as a person with like a disability, I just remember like very similar kind of to your narrative. I just remember wanting to kind of challenge some of these systems that place barriers for me and for people like me. So but I actually didn't go into the world of disability. I actually went into the world of substance use. When I was a teenager, I worked for many years at a methadone and Suboxone maintenance clinic, and I did that work for a really long time. And then after that, I worked at another CHC within a harm reduction program, and I'm very passionate about harm reduction. And then from there, I did some work at Ryerson University at their Office for Sexual Violence. And then I just recently completed my my master's, so I did a placement at the school board, which was very different, right? So and I think like when you go into this field, you kind of a lot of us aren't really, we jump around a lot, right? Because it's kind of like a holistic and it's always changing, right? You're gonna have to have your toolbox full of kind of different skills, because no one's ever the same. So I think, like Adana was saying, you just kind of, everything you do prepares you for this job, because it's always changing, right? So yeah.
Congratulations on that. What are some programs your agencies have created to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic? Amanda, I'm going to start with you, and then Adana.
Okay, so prior to COVID, we were accepting clients for primary care, so to see like medical services, but now we're kind of working harder to reduce barriers for primary care, especially for clients who are non-status and with special circumstances. So that's a service that we've been really pushing forth and like kind of doing some outreach around. We've been doing a lot more like similar to what Adana was saying, like kind of opening the doors to more services when it comes to mental health and counseling. So we're doing a lot of phone counseling sessions now. The agency also has a food security program now, just kind of supporting folks with obtaining food security resources and knowing where to look. So that's a new program. And then we also have a new income support program. So that's kind of just helping folks navigate like how to apply for CERB and EI and maybe some other funding that they might be eligible for. And then most recently, our health promotion group started to launch virtual programming. So they're doing virtual programming for seniors, for postnatal and prenatal groups, and then also fitness groups. So that's kind of like what's new at the agency.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool.
For us, we launched right from the get-go. We did what we call the rapid response program. So as soon as um, everybody came to the conclusion that this was a thing, this pandemic was here to stay. It's not something that's just kind of gonna pass. We reached out to all of our members to sort of figure out what are some of your needs, what are some things that you want. So we did a survey with all of our alumni from our inception to now. And we got an idea of what were some of the things that people were looking for. And in response to that, we developed the Rapid Response Program. And from that, it really was about mental health support. So mental health support, not how we normally do it, but for everybody. So everybody gets wellness checks. Everybody gets to have those conversations with a social worker. We also developed something that we would love to keep doing to address food security. We actually do. We deliver food items on a weekly basis. Now that's not something we've ever done before. Now it's such a meaningful, such a widely used program. We do so food delivery. We deliver things like baby supplies and other essential supplies during this time. We do sector scrums. So I mentioned that we serve different sectors. What we did during this time is to create a platform whereby cohorts that are from the same sector can come together and have conversations about how to navigate their sector needs during this pandemic. Talk about what are some of the things that they're doing in order to sharpen their skills, or in order to keep their momentum or keep their motivation, or maybe just have conversations around how their field is being impacted. And also, to I think you mentioned Brandon, in the beginning, to reduce that feeling of isolation and that feeling of just like they're alone in a very, very scary situation. Like, I know a lot of people compared this situation to like an Armageddon or something, like the end of the world, some scene out of a sci-fi, and it was hard for people to go through that alone. So we did a lot of the sector scrums. We drastically increased our live social media engagement. So we were doing like social media lives constantly for a number of reasons. So one, it was to bring in professionals from different sectors to sort of do spread knowledge like on a wider platform that was open to anyone and everyone. Also to help folks cope with what was going on around them. We did even just news segments. We brought out our C News channel that is just bringing information against to the community. What are things that are happening? What's going on? What's available out there for you? We also did, because again, the holistic word, we did workout sessions. So we had 3 days a week. We had workout sessions on GoToMeeting, some for staff, because again, we need to take care of ourselves, and then some for the general public. And our we try to do workshops, different workshops for the general public. So things like creating and setting goals. We're doing BIA, which is business in action, online or in a virtual setting. We've really tried to transition all of the things that we do regularly. We're trying to transition that into a virtual setting now. So we're getting ready to launch our programs that we would normally have been running in a face-to-face setting. So our C-Tech program is coming up, our film production is coming up, our culinary arts program is coming up, and we are looking to run all of those virtually right now.
And their exercise groups were really good. I sat in on one once. They're really fun.
Yeah, like I follow C, and I've seen Tug's couple interviews, and also seen I popped in to see the exercise, but I didn't partake. I saw people actually working at it. I just like,
Fun.
Yeah, serious, man.
Yeah, it was cool, man.
They're fun.
So yeah, you guys kind of said, like, as a segue, has COVID-19 impacted the way you're able to support your clients? Amanda, and then Adana.
So of course it has. Like, there's definitely pros and cons. So like on the pro side, I as an agency, and especially from the mental health and social work program, as a team, we feel like there's been more accessibility for harder to reach community members. So folks that might have disabilities, or like childcare is always a thing, or they might have financial limitations. So even taking the bus or paying for gas to actually physically go to an appointment, that barrier has it's not there anymore, because we're doing sessions over the phone or through a video, right? So it becomes more convenient because now the social worker is calling the client. So it's kind of like we're seeing people, there's less no shows. People are like, okay, like I have the session today, I'm gonna be present for it, right? Which is great. And we're able to address mental health stigma. So I think a lot of folks beforehand, a lot of kind of the narratives I was hearing from community members, especially like youth, was like there was a lot of stigma to even go to like a health center to go access counseling supports, and from specific communities, like like there is a big stigma to go see a counselor, right? Like I can say from my own community, I identify as Portuguese, like it's just not something a lot of communities do. So that kind of also addresses that stigma, because nobody really knows. Like you can say you're on the phone with a friend, right? And then there's more options for community members too. Like before, it was just like you just have to come into for an appointment Monday to Friday. We have evenings, but you have to come in person. Now, like there's more options, right? Like we can communicate over the phone, video, we can email. So it's like more accessible. But on the other hand, there are some cons too, right? So like one of the biggest ones is confidentiality. So when you're at home or wherever you are, like we've had situations where family members are doing a session, when folks are doing sessions over the phone at home, and like a family member walks in, so it's like, oh whoa, and they're in the middle of saying something really vulnerable, or they're on the bus and trying to have a session with you, or outside. So that's a huge issue, right? And then not being able to physically be with people, it can also be hard. Like I think a lot of the work that we do as social workers, body language is huge. So we don't get those cues now, and a lot of times even just being in the same room as someone, that kind of like addresses social isolation in a way as well, right? Like, and I think that's a really big piece that sometimes we forget to mention, right? Like just physical presence is huge. That's not there anymore, right? And then technical difficulties have been very challenging. Sometimes the internet, like, it doesn't work, or your phone disconnects, or there's always something, right? So that's been a challenge as well. And then I think safety is also an issue sometimes too. Like we've been getting a lot of calls in terms of like domestic violence. Sometimes it's harder to assess those cases for safety, because like sometimes, again, because of confidentiality, the person might not be in a safe situation, but they won't tell you because the person that is making the situation unsafe is right there. So I think being creative as to how we can get clients to communicate that, and how we can develop safety plans that make sense for them, that's been challenging too, right? So yeah, so there's been pros and cons.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's definitely been pros and cons in terms of how COVID has impacted how we're supporting our members. One of the one of the unfortunate parts with the onset of this pandemic was in towards the end of some of our programs, and so some folks had to be without placement, or lost job opportunities, and that was obviously very difficult for some of our young people. One agency that we were in partnership with actually just closed down like almost to the end of program. So we really had to deal with a lot of managing expectations and trying to build resilience for our young people, because as you can imagine, doing something that you know what the end is, there's a placement coming, there's a potential job, and then all of a sudden everything just kind of vanishes away,
Yeah.
with no understanding as to when
Yeah.
things are going to come back together. That's a very scary place for a lot of people to be. So a lot of work around building resilience, and just building up that sense of you're not in this alone.
Yeah.
The entire globe is going through this. We're going through it together. We're going to recover together. It's not always going to be this way. So that was challenging. Like Amanda mentioned, the technical difficulties can also be challenging. We do our
Yeah.
best sort of run through those before we actually face externally to minimize some of those things, kind of like what we did. You know, you have you have the pre-check, the pre-conversation check, just to make sure everything's okay.
Yeah.
So we do some of that, and then one of the things that, like Amanda was mentioning, one of the things that we've recognized is that more people have been open to therapy, and it's been harder for people to say no. So some of like, I don't think it's a secret that, especially within the Black community, mental health is taboo. You know, we don't always talk about depression and anxiety because, like, who deals with that? Like, Black people don't experience those things. You know, like, those are the conversations we hear so many times. But now, with everybody talking about it, it was
Mm.
easier for people to admit, like, okay, yeah, like, I actually feel very afraid, or like, I feel a lot of anxiety, or some PTSD is sort of like surfacing for me. It was easier for a wider variety of people to come forth and talk about it. It was easier for um men as well as women to admit to having going through domestic violence situations. Like,
Yes.
COVID and the open and honest conversations that everybody was having, that
Mm.
was it wasn't just some people are affected, although people were affected differently, but
Yeah.
everybody was having the conversation around anxiety and mental health and isolation. So I think it made it easier for folks to have those conversations. One thing that places like Unison and C, we for me, I feel like COVID has made us even more flexible and
Yeah.
innovative, and COVID has forced us to stretch. Like, if it wasn't for the things that we're experiencing, there are some ideas and there are some processes, there are some things that are extremely beneficial that we would not necessarily have thought about, because you know what I mean? Like, the need wasn't really there. So it's definitely forced us to stretch, because one of the first things we established was that during this, we're staying open so that we can support all of our alumni from inception. We didn't want to leave anybody untouched, because just because you went through a program like 4 years ago doesn't mean you're not going through the exact same struggles that somebody who was on their way to placement is going through. So we
Yeah.
decided that we were going to leave nobody untouched, and so it stretched us to reach out to everybody in order to see how we can support. So
Yeah.
there were negatives, but we definitely re-engaged so many of our members, whether they wanted just an Uber voucher or they just wanted somebody to talk to, like,
Yeah.
whatever it was. We were so innovative and flexible in what we offered that we were able to touch so many more lives. So COVID has, it's stretched us.
Yeah, I agree. I think as community agencies, it's also, I think a lot of us were working a lot collaboratively as well. But I think, you know, COVID has kind of pushed us to even work more collaboratively, and, like, you know, kind of be like, what are you guys doing? Can we do that in a different way that matches our community's needs? And I think that's a good thing, right? Like, that has strengthened us as a community. And I think, you know, that we should celebrate, right? Yeah.
Yeah, agreed.
Another question that's, again, this is off scripted, but I was sort of thinking about this in the sense of um, how do you guys support yourself? Because there's days like, you know, you guys are not, you know, erased or removed from the effects of being human, right? And this is something that I navigate myself, where there's just days where I'm going through depression. There's days where I'm going through, you know, not feeling motivated, feeling overwhelmed. And then there's this vibe of working. So how do you navigate that for yourself? But you guys are supposed to be support. You guys not supposed to. You guys are supporters. So this is the question: how do you guys navigate taking care of yourself and then also do that support for others in those tough days?
You want to go first, Sudan?
Okay. That's a really good question, because I mentioned before, like, those who support others need to be supported as well. One of the things that we've been hearing a lot more lately is, you know, like, check in on your strong friends, because those are those ones that are expected to carry everybody's burdens, or those ones who, and even though, we say, you don't take things home and you all this stuff, like you
Yeah.
take some of this stuff home because, well, you work from home. So there's really not that separation anymore. But like the work hours during COVID has been just like, because you're working so hard in order to support folks. So the boundaries were definitely just
Hmm.
smashed into pieces.
Yeah.
But I think it's for me, one of the things that we have at C is a very understanding culture. And I think that is so important. Like the workplace culture is conducive to get it done, but how are you doing?
Yeah.
And for me, even as a manager, it's ensuring that I have those conversations with folks. Like, how are you really feeling on the ones? How are you doing? And knowing that I can't just tell somebody something and not do it myself. So being able to, set boundaries when I can,
Yeah.
being able to take a pause when I need to, recognizing that it's important for us to be kind to ourselves, because so many times we find it easier to be kind to other people, and we're not as kind to ourselves. The things that we say to ourselves, the things that we expect of ourselves, like, having reasonable expectations of ourselves,
Yeah.
because we're not divorced from the things that are happening. Even kind of like to bring this in, Brandon, but even like with the whole movement against anti-black racism that's happening simultaneously with the pandemic, like there's no escaping it. You know what I mean? Like you don't get to be the supporter all the time, because you're experiencing the very same thing that the folks that you're supporting are experiencing. So even like simple things like knowing when you need to take a break from social media, knowing when you need to unplug, knowing that you don't need to constantly be in the loop in order to be validated in any way, knowing that um, there is a group of people that you can have conversations with that leave you energized and refreshed and rejuvenated, understanding that there are when we talk about social capital, we talk about different circles. So there's the circle that you give to, and there's a circle that you get from, and there's a circle that's reciprocal. Knowing that when you need that circle, that are going to pour back into you, as opposed to you always pouring out to other people. Knowing what makes you well. And when I say well, I do, again, that holistic world. So we always talk about self-care in terms of your mind, your body, your spirit, your soul. Like, what are you doing in order to take care of all those parts of yourself? And for me, like, creating a self-care plan is taking care of all those things, even your relationships. How are you taking care of those things? How are those things feeding you? What am I doing for my soul today? What am I doing for my body today? What am I doing for my mind today? What am I doing for, because we are holistic beings. So knowing when we need to take a break, breathe, be kind to yourself, whatever that looks like, even if it means like, going to bed at a certain time, being intentional about what you watch, taking walks with your mask on and practicing social distancing. But like, just it's the little things on a consistent basis that matter. If you do the little things consistently, then it's not impossible, but it takes a longer time for you to need that big thing, because you do those small things consistently.
Thank you for that. And
Um,
Amanda,
Adana articulated all so well, so I'm just gonna kind of piggyback off her. I think one of the things she said at the beginning that's really important is like this whole situation has impacted us all so differently. So being mindful of that, right? And like how Adana said, there's certain groups that you're gonna give more to and you're gonna get more to from, and then there's certain groups where it's gonna be more reciprocal. Being mindful of that, being Danny, you said it so beautifully, so I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I think, as human beings, like most of us are creatures of habit, so routine is really important, and it makes a difference, right? So it's like making sure, like, you're trying your best to maintain, like, that sleep that we need or what works for you, right? And making sure we're trying to get a little bit of physical exercise, and the food that we put in our bodies, being mindful of those kinds of things. And just honestly, like, sometimes you need a break. So like, I know last week I had, like, it was a more challenging week. It was a heavier week. There was a lot of crisis. So by Thursday I was really feeling it. And I think being able to compete, when you're lucky to have an employer where you can communicate that, like, I need some time, like I just need to recharge. That's really important. So setting those boundaries, knowing your limits, because if you're just going to go, you're not going to be very much good to anybody, right? Like, because you're not going to be able to provide the care, the support, whatever it is your role is, in the best way you can, right? Because you're not going to be fully charged. You're going to be halfway there. And I think that, just that, telling myself that, like, oh my God, I'm not going to be fully present for the people I'm supporting. That's enough for me to be like, I need to chill out. I need to like do a little bit less today, and just be aware of that. And it takes time, but it's, these are things that we need to get into the habit of, because how are we going to move forward if we don't kind of maintain these routines and listen to ourselves, right? So
I really appreciate the transparency in both your answers on that one. Back to the script. Amanda, we're going to start with you, and then Dan, if you can just answer this question, which is, what are some of the mental health supports needs that you've seen emerge over the past few months with the clients that you're seeing?
Okay, so I think there's been a couple of things, like a couple of trends. So a social isolation has definitely intensified. I'm seeing a lot more people presenting like symptoms of like loneliness, a lot more relationship stressors, because it's harder to set boundaries. People are in like shared space. There's a limited amount of things that we can do. So that's definitely been a big one. Increased use of substances, moods are much lower, and people are often presenting feelings of continuous like worry and anxiety, and just not that feeling of not knowing, right? Which is absolutely understandable. And then we've also been getting a lot more, like I had mentioned before, domestic violence incidents, and like a parent asking for more support with parenting, right? Because it's been a challenge, right? Like, it's summer right now. A lot of kids would have been doing, at Unison, we have a free camp that we offer a couple of weeks in the summer. That doesn't exist right now. It's an extra burden for parents and for certain people. So of course these stressors are elevated. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like it's pretty much what it's really is pretty much all the things that Amanda said. She mentioned all the things that we see in terms of exacerbated mental health needs. I think the only thing I'd add to that, and obviously that's very culturally specific, but given the climate and the challenges around anti-Black racism now, it is the
Mm-hmm.
sense of hopelessness sometimes, and the overwhelming feeling of tiredness, like the emotional, mental, spiritual, just tiredness and hopelessness around, okay, what do we do? Where do we go? When is this going to stop? So that's definitely something that was exacerbated more at this time because of the things that are happening in the US and Canada. Um, that obviously just, along with COVID, just made everything so much worse. But yeah.
Yeah. And I agree. A lot of our clients are expressing similar kind of narratives. And I think it's, as agencies, I think it's our duty to provide services that reflect these needs, and in order for us to enact real change. And I know Unison is, working with other CHCs. So like our groups reflect anti-racist practices. So clients have access to clients that reflect their own cultures and narratives and stories. So I think that's really important. And as agencies, I think that's part of our role, and we kind of have to take that on, right? Because that kind of helps deflect that feeling of hopelessness, right? That there is change happening, right? So, yeah, and I know you guys have been doing a lot.
I feel like no, I feel like Unison has always been intentional about providing support from a place that understands the diversity of the community within which their residents, like they know where they are, and the groups and the supports and the social workers like always represent that. So when we're sending folks to even post COVID, when we're sending folks to to Unison, like I can say to Amanda, like you know where this person's coming from, like you know the kind of support that they're going to need, and they've always been good with that. So hats
Yeah.
off to for that way.
I think it's important as agencies, especially mental health agencies, to be purposeful about who we hire and the kind of services we offer. So we know we service a very diverse population. So you know our counselors and our mental health workers are diverse, and they reflect that population. And similar with like C, like their staff reflect the community that they're supporting. I think that's very important, right? Yeah.
Definitely.
Have you seen an increase in people trying to access your agency services? Why do you think that is? Adana and then Amanda.
The answer is definitely yes, which is why we thought, you know what, like this can't just be a C alumni thing. Like we have to just open this up to, obviously we have boundaries still, but we have to open this up to the wider community, because everybody experienced loss of jobs. Everybody is experiencing the fear, the anxiety, the depression. Everybody's experiencing a surge in just needing those very basic things. And because of our rapid response program, because we were offering those very basic things, individuals definitely reached out. Also, at the beginning of this, there are a lot of agencies like ours whose doors were closed. And it was such a hard thing, because where do you go when the place that you're accustomed to going is no longer in operation due to this pandemic? And one of the things one of the things that our executive team, our executive director, I must call her name, is Agapi Gisesa. And one of the things that she really did from the jump was go hard in saying like we cannot afford to abandon people when they need us the most. So that means going back to funders and be like, you have to help us, because we are, if our doors are closed, if like where are people going? You know what I mean? Because so many doors were closed at the same time.
Yeah.
So the fact that there were less options at the beginning, and the it wasn't just a youth issue, it was a global issue, and people just didn't know where to turn to.
Yeah.
And we were accessible and open and available. Definitely there was definitely increase in demand for services, and yeah, because everybody's going through the same thing at the same time.
Yeah. So very similar to Adana, like a lot of places were closed, okay? Like that is devastating for people. Like think if you're a senior, like you have, a lot of our seniors, they have their routines, they go to certain groups throughout the week, they have that set routine every day, they've been doing that 365, all of a sudden gone. Yeah. It's devastating, right? And even our youth, right? And I think having to navigate that was very challenging, and advocating for, new programming and programming that matched the needs of the community, like in the here and now, was really important. And I think we just got way more, like just based on a lot of the things we have said, like a lot more internal and external referrals. We've even been getting a lot of referrals from like folks outside of the city, which, and I think that has to do with the fact that places were closed, and, there's not as many mental health services when you leave Toronto. So yeah, it's just been like, the floodgates, like kind of were, overcharged a little bit. So yeah, it's been busy.
And yeah, big shout to Agapi. I saw her on the news recently, and she killed the interview. It was a great interview. It was shared a bunch of times. Mm-hmm. But as you're talking, Adana, I started to think about, C was also in my floodgate a lot recently. With you guys lost someone that impacted a lot of folks. I never met this woman, but there was a lot of people on my social media that was passing on condolences. And as you're talking, I'm wondering, like, how do folks go through, like, navigate grief? And maybe you can't answer this question right now, but like as the organization is maybe grieving someone, but then also doing this work. And I think there's a challenge, and this is a balance I think with a lot of organizations are trying to face, which is being productive, but then also support yourself of like, hey, this is a pandemic and grief. And I'm wondering how did that look like this last couple of weeks over at sea?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I want to start by saying, unfortunately, for us at sea, we've dealt with a lot of loss over the years. We've lost a number of members through gun violence and overdose and those sort of situations, because we really do serve the quote unquote hardest to serve population. Like, we really want to reach out to Black youth that may have other doors closed in their face, and that comes with youth at increased risk of a variety of different things. So we've dealt with a significant amount of loss. So that grieving conversation, that grieving process is something that we go through. Unfortunately, this is the first time we've had a former member of staff pass. The interesting thing about that is, so some of our staff are fairly new, and the former staff who passed was from one of the staff members who were there towards the earlier part. The folks who were there at the beginning with and worked with that staff member were obviously really, really, really affected very heavily by it. And I think for the rest of us, it was about creating space and understanding and holding space for people. So literally, even as like, in my role as the social supports manager, like, sometimes people turn to, especially when you have an interdisciplinary team, like, people turn to the social workers, like, okay, like, what do we
Yeah.
do? And being able to hold space for the other staff members, being able to talk people through some of what they were feeling, being able to just create a space where people can talk openly and honestly about their feelings and feel their feelings, and
Yeah.
cry, and have that moment and stand in solidarity with staff and give people space when they need. Like, some folks needed to take some time, like take a day or two off, and being able to create that space for individuals so that they can go through the process and they can grieve and mourn. Because again, there's so many things happening all at once, and it's just another straw that breaks the camel's back, and there's no coming back from something like death, obviously. So really just standing in solidarity, creating safe spaces for people to mourn and grieve and go through that, and just have those conversations about the staff member. So thanks
Yeah.
for asking. It definitely was a very trying time for a number of our staff members.
Yeah.
Nah, I appreciate the transparency, and it's just, I think one of the thing I'm loving about hearing about both your organizations is just like the again, there's not this, it's a holistic approach, but it's like there's a humanness, and it also sounds like it's informed by community versus top down. You know what I'm saying? So, yeah. Anyways, next question: has COVID created any additional barrier for people to access your agency services? Amanda, let's start with you.
Yes, it has. So, like, obviously trends that we've kind of like put forth is that more people are trying to access mental health counseling services. So what that means is that there's longer wait times, right? And that's unfortunate because, like, when people call us, they're ready for that support. And it just, it's devastating, to have to tell that person you got to wait a couple weeks to a couple months, right? So I think that's one of the major ones. And then the other thing is, like, a lot of our clients are very, like, they're vulnerable populations. They don't all have access to a phone. Like, they don't all have access to the internet. That's a privilege that, like, a lot of us get to, live with, including myself. So kind of navigating that and advocating for like internet resources or phone services for clients, or like getting them tablets. That's something that, we've had to kind of do. And then just going back, like, a lot of services have changed, or they're not operating at the same capacity. So housing, like food banks, like they're working differently. Immigration, youth services are very different now as well. And all of these services, there's often delays, which has been very frustrated for clients, right? Like it's hard to move forward, right? So yeah, those things have all been really tough on us as a community.
I agree, and I think all of those things Amanda mentioned, like really navigating some of those systems, were difficult before. Now it's even more so. Shelter system, housing system,
Yeah,
like those have definitely been very challenging. Another thing is, in addition to what Amanda mentioned, another thing is that we were very intentional about meeting people where they're at, literally, if we
yeah,
didn't hear from them. So prior to COVID, we would, if we're trying to reach out to a member and we're not hearing from you, we don't know that you're okay, we would literally go to your house, knock on your door so we can see your face, so we know that you're okay. We know, because sometimes when you're in the throes of depression or whatever, it's hard to reach out or even
yeah,
answer the phone or make a call. So we would literally go to people's homes.
yeah,
COVID really shifted that, that was hard,
yeah,
because like, the people who are not able to reach out or answer, whether it is that they don't have internet access, or whether they're not safe, or whether they are in depression. You don't know. You know what I mean? Because there's no way of figuring that out. So especially at the beginning, it was hard. Now we're getting back to that somewhat. Maybe not going to people's homes, or going to, like, arranging meetings in different spaces, in public spaces where we can practice
yeah,
social distancing. So malls and in the community. But that was definitely something that was a barrier to folks accessing services. And if they can't come to us, like, us going to them was definitely a big part of how we do what we do, and that
yeah.
was challenged very heavily during this time.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Um, Staying with Adana, what kind of mental health supports are people who are employed navigating during this time of COVID-19?
That's a good that's a good question. So some of the organizations, like our organization, we have EAP, which is like an employee assistance program that folks have access to, that folks are able to use. But I would say the first thing is our culture of supporting each other, and relying on each other. We have psychotherapists. We have a psychotherapist on staff that is providing support to even staff members remotely. There is a very there's a very there were different organizations that kind of reached out. Okay, like, frontline staff, what are you doing? What kind of supports do you need? And that was helpful. So we didn't use all of them, but those were available. So, like, York University had their therapists reach out. There were different organizations that kind of reached out and were open to supporting our staff. But I think for us, mainly what folks use are our culture of support, EAP, on staff psychotherapists. Um, and I know there's a comprehensive list of different supports that are available through the City of Toronto website. That's actually very helpful, because it's specific in terms of culture and identity, whether it's gender identity, sexual orientation. Like, they're very detailed in terms of what sort of supports you need, where you should go.
I'm going to rework that question, actually. I'm going to rework that question because where I was trying to go with that question is what people who are working or employed right now during COVID, what are some of the mental health stressors that are coming up for them who are working? Uh,
Oh, um, there's a lot of the same things that folks that are not working are going through. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of fear. Like, there are folks who still are adamant about not getting out of their house for any reason whatsoever, that are on staff. There are folks who are dealing with depression, burnout, compassion fatigue,
Mhm.
because, like you say, you're doing this all the time, every day, and sometimes the situations that you face or the situations that you're trying to work through, they're not easy things that you can just have one conversation with somebody and it goes away. So these are things that you're working through with somebody on an ongoing basis, and you're trying to serve like 200 and somebody alumni plus community on top of that. We don't have a very large team. We have a very powerful team, but not a very large team. So folks having to deal with things like compassion fatigue, folks having to deal with things like burnout, and us constantly having to rework or reassess, what does work look like for you, what does work need to look like for you for the next week, what do you need in order to, because one thing I always stress is the work needs to be sustainable. What we're doing needs to be sustainable, because a lot of times in the work that we do, sustainability takes a hit. Like we go hard and we take care of everybody, but if we don't take care of ourselves, we can't do this work for very long. So sustainability is definitely something that we try to do a lot, but compassion fatigue and burnout and anxiety are three of the most prevalent things that we've seen this time.
Sorry, compassion fatigue. And what is that exactly? I've never heard that before.
Compassion fatigue essentially is around the understanding that your empathy, because you constantly have to be empathetic towards individuals, the things that they're going through, and you cannot do work effectively if you are emotionally removed or stoic.
Because you can't be empathetic.
Exactly. If I'm talking to you and I can't feel you feeling me, then I'm not trying to talk to a brick wall. You know what I mean? So in order to do this work constantly, it takes a lot out of an individual. After a while, if you don't find ways to replenish what you're always pouring out, you come to a place where you cannot absorb anything else. You come to a place where you don't have empathy to give anymore. It's out. And then you start becoming resentful. You start just being constantly tired, emotionally, physically, spiritually. You're just drained and tired. You don't have any more to give, and it actually does more harm to the people that you're trying to serve than good. Because if you can't show up in a empathetic way, if you can't be present, then you can actually re-traumatize people. You can actually make individuals turn their back on the service that they really need, and you're doing more harm than good, and it's not sustainable. Sooner or later, if you don't check that, if you don't get that resolve, then it's going to lead to burnout. Or you see people like that all the time. Like, you go to those agencies and they're those people who just don't care. Like, they've been there so long and they're just like, they're there, but they're not there. And you have people just like, I don't ever want to go back to talk to that person. That person was so mean, or that person just, they didn't care. They give you resources, but it's just like here you go. And it's not, they didn't start out that way. They just didn't take care of themselves along the way, and they've been doing it for so long. They've seen this story so many times that it's no longer Adana coming to me with this. It's just, it's just another person, it's just another number. I cannot absorb anymore. I cannot show up or be present or be empathetic with you anymore. Like, I can't take it on without exploding. So I'm gonna put my walls up, whether you say it intentionally or not, and I guess work from that place.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. Amanda, yourself?
Yeah, I think like Adana said it really well. I think and just going back to what I had mentioned before, it's like being aware and purposeful of your actions. Like, you have to, like doing this work, you have to be really reflective and you have to know yourself really well. And I think a lot of people, one of the biggest struggles I think folks are having is learning how to establish new boundaries with COVID, right? So working from home and establishing boundaries with, roommates, loved ones, whoever it is, right? And a lot of us are doing this work from our bedrooms. So, and having to, mentally tell yourself like, okay, I'm checking out now. I'm no longer at work. So learning to build those new boundaries it has been new, right? And it's a process. So I think that's been, one of the main ones. And I think, focusing on self-care. And I really liked how Adana said at the beginning, like just making a self-care plan. And for everyone, that's going to look really different. And we all are different. So just kind of sticking to it, knowing what works for you, and like maintaining that routine is really important. I can't express that enough. Like, and self-care doesn't mean like bubble baths and like, you know, a night like delicious food and a nice bottle of wine. It can be like, you know, going for a walk, calling your best friend, like watching a show you like it's so different for all of us. But just, you know, having that plan, I think the most important thing is just being organized and like, you know, just being true to yourself and knowing what you can and cannot handle, because at the end of the day, if you're doing more than you can kind of take on, you're not going to be helpful. Right. Oh, and then another thing that I've been noticing, especially with people that are employed, I've been noticing some people like feelings of guilt, like so I think some people, you know, with so many people being unemployed and dealing with, you know, a lot of financial struggles, I think there's like this also sense of guilt, like here I am, like employed when, you know, like my friend, my cousin, my whatever, my neighbor is, you know, struggling. And I think that's also been really real. And like
yeah, it's almost
and
like survivor's guilt, right?
yeah, it is. And not only with like COVID, but like with the protests and with, you know, there's been increased overdose and more violence. Like we've been seeing all these trends, and I think those kind of just perpetuate those feelings of like guilt. So, and I think it's like processing that is important. And I like how C, you know, like C does those huddles in the morning, and I think as a team, and I think that's, you know, great. And I think, you know, Adana, going back to like, you know, the city did put out that great resource, and that's something like, you know, people who are employed, you can advocate to your employers and be like, hey, is there any way we can adapt some of these into our workplace, right? So I think that's really important as well.
I'd love to hear more about this huddle, actually.
Yeah, no, it's great. I think it's a great idea.
So we call it Scrum.
Yeah.
We call it Scrum. So every morning before the day starts, the entire team meets. Like obviously now we're doing it via GoToMeeting. The entire team meet, and it's a way to have people come to the space, come to work, and find themselves there. Because obviously we come to work and physically we're there sometimes, but mentally we're just all over the place. So we
Yeah.
do different, we have discussions, sometimes just completely random discussions about things that are happening in the world, or just to get people's perspectives and people's thoughts and feedbacks around different things. So sometimes the question can be as random as, if you could be a person from the past, who would you be, or what is your superpower? And everybody gets to go around and talk about it. Something completely unwork related. Sometimes something has nothing to do with work. Sometimes it's a teaching day where we do talk about, okay, what are some of the things that are coming up? And so we have those discussions. We ground ourselves, and then we do what are you doing for the day and what support do you need? So everybody kind of goes through, okay, this is what my day looks like. I'm gonna need Amanda to help me with this. I'm gonna need Brandon to help me with this. Like I'm gonna need some time to block off that nobody contacts me during this time because I'm gonna be doing coaching or whatever that looks like. And then to end it off, we do a motivational sort of send off. So okay, this is how we're gonna approach our day, da 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 da. And we actually do it's like a sports analogy towards the end. So we do the motivation, this is how you're gonna play today, this is how you're gonna do it, and then we actually we actually bring it in and say whatever our word is, and just kind of get everybody hype and ready for the day. And it's actually it's so powerful. It can last anywhere up to like an hour and a half, even for some really intense discussions, like 2 hours. But it's really good. It eases that sense of isolation, and you're just talking, you're learning more about people, you're hearing different perspectives, like, oh, I didn't know you thought like that. And it's just interesting and an engaging way to know folks, right?
Yeah.
Sounds dope, man. On the flip side, what kind of mental health supports are people who are unemployed, navigating during this time of COVID, even with CERB? Adana and then Amanda.
Yeah, I think for people who are unemployed, even with CERB, a lot of it is the fear of the unknown. A lot of it is the anxiety of okay, what comes next? What's happening next? Where are we going? Like as much as we don't have control, we are people who like to have control or like to imagine that we have control.
Yeah.
So this sense of we don't know what's happening, or we don't know what's going on, or we don't know how to do what we're doing is definitely very pervasive for people who are who are unemployed. Even like with CERB ending soon, the idea of what's coming next, people
Yep.
having to figure out, okay, how am I paying my rent once this whole sort of releases and I have like 3-4 months worth of rent and no job. Like those are some really difficult places to those are some really difficult places to be in. And I mean, people are incredibly adaptive, but there's only so much that you can take. There's only so much that what I like to say is there's only so much water a sponge can absorb before it starts leaking.
Yeah.
So like dealing with all the things that we mentioned, the anxiety, the fear, the PTSD, the feeling of, as much as some people feel isolated, some people feel trapped, like
Yeah.
they don't know where to go. They want to get out, but they don't know where to go. Like options are very limited. Where are you gonna go? You're gonna leave your domestic, your violent situation to go to a shelter that where people may have COVID-19. Like the options are
And you're
so
gonna bring your kids,
exactly.
so yeah.
Those are, yeah, really difficult, really challenging situations that folks are facing, employed or not, serb or not. It
Mhm.
really is. Yeah, the struggles are similar.
Yeah. I honestly don't have anything to add. That is literally, I couldn't have said it better myself. Like we're dealing with very similar, like folks that are dealing like that are unemployed. Like I just gonna mirror what you said, Adana.
Yeah.
That's okay. How has the process of physical distancing impacted the way you traditionally build trust with your client? Amanda, then Adana.
So I talked a little bit about body language, and like obviously all social workers, mental health professionals are different. For me, body language is really important. I think not having that has been challenging as not only a professional, but for a lot of the community members I work with. We're not going to pick up on so many nonverbal cues, which is hard, right? So I think that's been a really difficult for me on a personal level. I know a lot of my other colleagues have had challenges, and a lot of the clients I work with are like, I really miss coming into the center. For some, it's great not coming in, but for others, they really miss that connection, because just sitting in a room with someone who's there and is there to really support you and to be with you is just so powerful in itself, right? Like, so that's kind of been not there, you
Mm-hmm.
know. And I think, just, sometimes when you're in person with someone, there's more room for like, a little bit of silence that makes certain, when people express certain, certain parts of their stories that are more vulnerable, it just kind of validates it even more. And yes, you can use silence over the phone, but I just think it's so different when it's in person. So, I miss that.
Yeah, really to go off what Amanda's saying, it's a lot of just missing the in-person
Hmm.
contact. A lot of people, like Amanda said, are asking, when are you going back to the office? So we kind of have both. Like folks who are
Yeah.
like, I'm not really ready, but there are folks
Yeah.
who are like, when are we going back? Like when can I see, my cohort again? I think in terms of building trust, for me, human beings again are very adaptable. So
Yes.
at first, the whole online thing was kind of like that's a lot. The working from home
Yeah.
was that's a lot, and then people kind of got used to it. So it was very shaky at first, but
Yeah.
then we started to just kind of figure out, okay, so and again, confidentiality and privacy definitely comes into it, like Amanda mentioned. But are you gonna be okay with a phone conversation, or do you need a Zoom conversation? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because like for me, because it needs to feel like you're in person as much as possible,
Mm.
and you do have those moments where you need to where silence needs to not be, yeah, my phone got cut off, or my internet my internet left, my internet got
Yeah.
interrupted. Just like me sitting with you, like I need to see your face, I need to
Yes.
see those cues, the body language and all of that. So it's about people just understanding, okay, what do you prefer? um it's about folks who said, yeah, that's not the thing for me. There are folks who still have that stance, which is
Yeah.
challenging, because right now that's the only option. But for the majority of folks, there's been a process of adaptation where they've come to understand, like, okay, so my choices are Zoom or phone, or whatever is go-to meeting, whatever it is, or the telephone, and people have been open and doing their best to adapt. Human beings are
Yeah,
incredible.
I agree.
Has COVID-19 created any new opportunities for client supports with your agencies? Adana and then Amanda.
It definitely has. Like I said before, COVID-19 has forced us to stretch. And stretch in ways that we're never gonna go back to. Some of the things that we were not doing before. So again, literally delivering um 30 to 50 something boxes every Friday to people all over the city, mobilizing our staff to do that. Like that wasn't a
Yeah.
thing before. Now getting in partnership with different volunteers to help us to deliver those things, like being able to just meet people's basic needs more intentionally has been a real blessing for the folks that we served. COVID-19 has forced us to be entrepreneurial even more and to encourage that entrepreneurial spirit in our members. Because when you can't depend on somebody for a job, you have to create your own jobs.
Yeah.
So really, and the business in action or the entrepreneurial thing has always been a part of C, but even more so now we're like, okay, people are coming with different ideas and we're trying even more to harness that or to hone those skills, and just for us to talk more. It's opened the space for us to talk more about rest, about mental health, about self-care. It's really opened the door for us to be more intentional about that. I think one of the things that we did right from the jump was mindfulness days and producing different mindfulness videos. Like the uptake on that was incredible. Like people were really just going into that head first, and it was just like, yeah, because people need that, and that's not something we're intentional about doing before because we're so busy doing, programming and technical development and soft skills and da. We never really stopped to be intentional about that part. So those are new opportunities. Providing for basic needs are new opportunities. Being more aware of some of the things that we need to provide for people in order for them to be successful in program has been a new opportunity. So now you need to not just think about transportation to and from program. You actually need to think about internet access. You need to think about people having the proper devices to access the programs. You need to think about whether, like, do they have a space, like are they living in a shelter, I'm doing the program, or what that looks like. So just helping us to be more focused and more intentional to more people has been a thing for us. So again, it's definitely stretched us, so yeah, for new opportunities.
Yeah, and just like to piggyback off you and Dan, I think like what it has done is just like it just made us more accessible and more flexible. And for me, I couldn't be more proud because I went into this field to create more accessible avenues for folks, and I think we're really doing that, whether it's through food security or like mental health support or primary care, and just making sure people get those services, because we know like those are kind of the pillars to a happier, safer, healthier life, right? Like without those things it's hard to thrive. So I think that's what we're trying to do, and that's kind of the path we're on.